He was Hollywood's golden rebel, the man who made quiet roles unforgettable and turned a canyon in Utah into a cultural empire. Robert Redford wasn't just a movie star. He was a filmmaker, a conservationist, a visionary who reshaped the way the world thought about art, independence, and storytelling. When he passed away on September 16, 2025, at the age of 89, the world mourned an icon of cinema. But behind the tributes and the nostalgia, his family inherited something vast, layered, and astonishing, an empire built not only of wealth but of meaning. What Redford left behind was more than fortune. It was a legacy tied to land, ideals, and the delicate balance between art and commerce. For millions of fans, Redford will always be remembered through his characters: the outlaw hero of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, the restless drifter in The Electric Horseman, the truth-seeking journalist in All the President's Men, and the director who won an Academy Award for Ordinary People. His career spanned decades and defined eras of American cinema. But while his on-screen legacy is undeniable, what came after the cameras stopped rolling may prove even more lasting. Redford spent much of his life building something outside Hollywood, a vision that began in 1969 when he bought a patch of land in Utah's Provo Canyon. At the time, many thought it was just another celebrity retreat. In reality, it was the seed of what would become Sundance, a name that grew into one of the most influential cultural brands in the modern world. Redford always resisted the Hollywood machine. He wanted a space where creativity could thrive away from commercial pressure, where nature and art could coexist. Instead of building sprawling mansions or luxury hotels, he constructed modest cabins that blended into the wilderness. By the early 1980s, that canyon had evolved into something much larger. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting independent filmmakers with mentorship, labs, and funding. 4 years later, the Sundance Film Festival was born. What started as a modest gathering quickly became the heartbeat of independent cinema, launching the careers of filmmakers like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and Damien Chazelle. Each January, Park City transformed into a cultural epicenter, where studios and investors hunted for the next groundbreaking story. Sundance became more than a festival. It was a philosophy, rooted in authenticity, experimentation, and independence. A piece of land had transformed into an idea, and that idea into a global brand. Cabins were no longer just cabins. They were part of cinematic history. An acre of land was no longer just property, it was soil that had given birth to movements in film. The canyon itself became cultural currency, and Redford was its architect. By the 1990s, Sundance had expanded beyond film. It became a lifestyle, a resort, a catalog, even a clothing line. Yet at its core, it remained faithful to Redford's founding principle: protect the land, elevate the art. Financially, the results were impressive. Every acre saved, every cabin restored, every program nurtured added not just monetary value but symbolic weight. Unlike Hollywood, where success was measured by box office numbers, Redford's currency was influence, credibility, and cultural power. One of the most defining moments of his later years came in 2020, when he sold the Sundance Mountain Resort. For decades, the resort had been the heart of his Utah legacy. It wasn't Aspen or Vail, it wasn't about flash or exclusivity. It was about skiing, art, and community. So when Redford announced he was selling, many assumed he was cashing out. But at 84, his decision was more strategic than financial. He could have maximized profit by selling to developers eager to carve the 2,600-acre property into luxury hotels and subdivisions. Instead, he set terms that ensured Sundance would remain true to his vision. Of the 2,600 acres, more than 1,800 were locked into a permanent conservation easement. That meant no overdevelopment, no sprawling condos, no destruction of the canyon. Critics argued it limited the resort's future potential. But for Redford, it was the final act of stewardship, securing Sundance's integrity for generations. The deal was shrewd as well as symbolic. While the exact sale price was never disclosed, estimates placed it comfortably in the hundreds of millions. By selling, Redford gained liquidity late in life while ensuring that his heirs would not inherit the burden of managing a massive resort. Instead, they would inherit cash and trust funds, easier to divide, invest, and preserve. More importantly, the family inherited the prestige of a name still tied to Sundance, even if the property itself had been sold. It was a reminder of how Redford used money as a tool rather than an end, turning property into principle and profit into philosophy. His fortune was often underestimated. Headlines in recent years suggested his estate was worth around $20 million in real estate alone, including his beloved home in Sundance, a property in Napa, and houses in California. Yet those numbers only scratched the surface. There were royalties from decades of acting and directing, earnings from Sundance businesses, an art collection, and Native American artifacts he had collected over his lifetime. But beyond figures and assets, what mattered most was meaning. For Redford, land was never just land, art was never just art. Each piece carried symbolism, and now his family must decide how to balance sentiment with practicality. Will the Sundance home remain a family retreat, preserved as heritage? Will his art collection stay intact or be dispersed into museums and private collections? These decisions will shape not only their inheritance but how the world remembers him. For his family, the responsibility is immense. His wife, Sibylle Saggers, an artist whom he married in 2009, shared more than 2 decades of life and vision with him. His daughters, Shauna and Amy, survive him, though his 2 sons, Scott and James, tragically died earlier in life. The mantle of stewardship now falls largely to his wife and daughters. They inherit not only wealth but a mission, to preserve or redefine a legacy that blends Hollywood fame with conservation, independence, and culture. The world paid tribute to Redford with praise, nostalgia, and recognition of his artistry. But beneath the memorials, the truth of his estate reveals something deeper. His final gift was not simply money but a model of how to live, and leave, a life of integrity. His story is not one of a man who built fortune for fortune's sake, but of someone who saw wealth as a way to protect meaning. Robert Redford's last sunrise at Sundance wasn't just the end of a Hollywood legend. It was the handoff of a vision. His family inherits more than property or profits. They inherit a canyon, a philosophy, and a cultural brand that will forever shape their name. His death was not a closing curtain, but a passing of responsibility, a pivot from one generation to the next. He showed that legacies can be built not on excess but on restraint, not on fleeting fame but on principles that endure. And as the sun set on the house in Provo Canyon where he drew his final breath, it also rose on a legacy that will continue to echo through art, culture, and the land he fought to protect.